Let me tell you something nobody warned me about when I signed up for the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. They give you the language downloads. They give you the cultural sensitivity training. They give you 300 pages of interspecies etiquette guidelines and a handbook on everything from how to bow correctly before a Valorian dignitary to the precise angle at which you should tilt your head when addressing a Tharkan elder without accidentally implying you want to fight their grandmother. 300 pages. They do not once, not even in a footnote, tell you what to do when an emperor of 63 star systems looks you in the eye across a room so large that the ceiling is hidden behind actual clouds and tells you that you must choose between his two daughters. Not choose who to sit next to at dinner. Not choose who to dance with at the ceremony. Choose, as in, permanently. As in, with legal and dynastic consequences that would reshape the political architecture of half the known galaxy. They don't cover that. Nobody covers that. My name is Callum Dreschner, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened on Meridian Prime, because I've been asked by 12 different archivists, 9 different diplomatic councils, and one very confused historian from the University of New Carthage to please just sit down somewhere quiet and talk. So I'm sitting down, and I'm going to talk. I should start before the palace. I should start at the shuttle dock on Valorian Station 7, where I was supposed to be doing something completely routine. The station smelled like 3 different atmospheres poorly mixed together, something sharp and metallic that the Valorians breathe, something sweetly stale that the Dorathi preferred, and underneath all of it, the faint burn of recycled oxygen that told you, with great reliability, that you were in a place designed by a committee and maintained by a budget. There's a specific kind of ugly that comes from function without aesthetic consideration, and Valorian Station 7 had perfected it. Gray corridors. Institutional lighting that made everyone look like they were slightly ill. Floors worn smooth by centuries of traffic from species with feet, claws, tendril clusters, and at least one type of locomotion I'd never been able to categorize properly. I was there as a Grade 4 human diplomatic liaison. Grade 4. That means I handled the stuff nobody else wanted to handle. Trade route disputes, border marker clarifications, the occasional interspecies misunderstanding that had escalated beyond the point where a form letter would fix it, but hadn't quite risen to the level where anyone important needed to get involved. I was 29 years old. I had a small office on the station with a window that looked directly into the loading bay, which meant I spent a lot of my workdays watching cargo containers being moved around. I had a very good coffee machine, real coffee, not the synthesized stuff, which I'd requisitioned through 3 separate approval chains and considered my greatest professional achievement. I was not, by any measurable metric, a person of galactic consequence, which is why I was so thoroughly unprepared for the morning when Senior Attaché Vornes came into my office. Didn't knock, just walked in, which should have been the first sign something was wrong, and put a data pad on my desk with the imperial seal of Meridian Prime on the front, glowing gold and slightly warm to the touch. "Read that," he said. I looked at him. Vornes was a Valorian, which meant he was about 2 meters tall with iridescent scales along his neck and the kind of stillness that felt slightly wrong to a human eye. He didn't fidget, didn't shift weight, didn't blink with anything resembling human frequency. He was one of the better diplomats I'd worked with. Calm, precise. He did not look calm now. He looked like something had gone wrong in a way that he hadn't yet fully processed. "Vornes," I said, "you look like someone told you the station is on fire. Read the document, Dreschner." I read it. Then I read it again. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, because I am a person who needs a few seconds when information hits me sideways. "They want me," I said slowly, specifically. "Specifically you, by name, by grade level, with your personnel file attached to the request." Why would the Emperor of Meridian Prime want me specifically? Vornes made a sound I'd come to recognize as the Valorian equivalent of a sigh, a low, controlled exhale through his secondary breathing slits. Because of the Tharkin incident. I winced. The Tharkin incident, right. 3 months prior, I had been sent to a Tharkin border station to mediate a dispute over mining rights in the Kelloran Belt. The dispute had started as a paperwork issue and escalated, as these things often do, into something considerably more complicated when both sides decided that the paperwork was representative of a deeper cultural disrespect. And the deeper cultural disrespect was representative of long-standing historical grievances. And the long-standing historical grievances were representative of the fundamental incompatibility of their civilizational values. By the time I arrived, there were 16 armed vessels in holding orbit, and the station commander had barricaded himself in the communications room. I don't want to oversell what I did. I talked to people, that's it. I sat across from very angry representatives of 2 species that had been circling each other like provoked predators, and I asked them questions, and I listened to the answers, and I asked more questions, and I didn't panic, and I didn't tell either side they were wrong, and I didn't try to be clever about it. 6 hours later, the ship started to stand down. 3 days later, we had an interim framework for the mining rights. I went back to my office with the window overlooking the loading bay, and I made myself a cup of very good coffee and thought nothing more about it. Apparently, someone had been watching. The Emperor witnessed the diplomatic feed from Tharkin, Vornes said. He was following the situation for unrelated reasons. One of the mining consortiums has connections to Meridian Prime's outer territory, and he saw how you handled it. I just talked to them. You talked to them in a way that worked. Vornes, I'm a grade 4 liaison. You are, as of approximately 40 minutes ago, a grade 4 liaison with a personal invitation from Emperor Kalian Vralos of Meridian Prime. He pointed at the data pad. Read the second page. I read the second page. The second page was where it got complicated. Meridian Prime. If you've traveled much in this galaxy, you know the name. If you haven't, let me give you the short version. 63 star systems, 412 inhabited worlds and orbital stations. A civilization that has been continuously functioning for approximately 11,000 years by human reckoning, which makes it older than most of human recorded history by a significant margin. The Meridian Empire is not the largest empire in the known galaxy. It's not the most militarily powerful. What it has always been, is the most diplomatically entangled. 11,000 years of treaties, alliances, marriages, grudges, ancient agreements, broken agreements, agreements about broken agreements. Every significant species with FTL capability has some kind of diplomatic relationship with Meridian Prime, which means that what happens inside that court has ripples that extend into almost every corner of explored space. Emperor Kalian Vralos had been ruling for 47 years, which in Meridian reckoning made him relatively young. Their lifespans run long, and some emperors had ruled for 3 centuries or more. He had 2 daughters. Princess Seraphine Vralos, who was the elder by 8 years and the current designated heir, and Princess Lien Vralos, who was the younger and who, according to every diplomatic briefing I'd ever read about Meridian court politics, was the significantly more complicated one. The second page of the document explained, in language so carefully formal that it took me a full reading to understand what it was actually saying, that there was a dispute, a succession dispute specifically, and that the dispute had reached a point where the emperor was invoking an ancient clause of Meridian law, one that hadn't been used in over 2,000 years, that allowed him to bind the succession question to the judgment of an approved outside party. An approved outside party of impeccable diplomatic standing and provable neutrality. Which apparently was me now. The dispute was this: both princesses wanted something, and what they wanted was mutually exclusive. And the emperor, for reasons the document declined to fully explain, could not make the decision himself without destroying one of the two major political coalitions that kept his empire from fragmenting. So he needed someone else to make it. He needed someone who had no stake in the outcome. No family ties to either coalition. No debts, no favors, no history with Meridian politics. He needed someone expendable enough that, if the decision caused a political catastrophe, the blame could be directed outward rather than inward. He needed, and I say this with the clearest possible self-awareness, a human. Because humans were, at this particular point in galactic political history, the species least entangled in Meridian imperial politics. We'd been in contact with the wider galaxy for only 60 years. We didn't have the debts yet. We didn't have the history. We were useful precisely because we didn't matter. I looked at Vornes across my desk. "This is above my pay grade," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "This is so far above my pay grade that I'm not sure my pay grade can see it from here." "Also yes. What happens if I refuse?" Vornes was quiet for a moment. That particular kind of quiet that experienced diplomats use when the honest answer is something they'd rather not say out loud. "There's no formal obligation," he finally said. "You can decline. The invitation is technically voluntary. But the Emperor of Meridian Prime made a personal request." He let that sit. In 60 years of human contact with the broader galactic community, no one at our level has ever been personally requested by an emperor. I understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't really a choice, not in any practical sense. Refusing a personal imperial invitation, at this moment in human diplomatic history, would create problems that would outlast both of us by several generations. "When do I leave?" I said. 2 days, Vornes said. "The shuttle is already arranged." I spent those 2 days reading everything I could find about Meridian Prime, which was an enormous amount of information, and also in the ways that actually mattered, not nearly enough. I read about the court structure, the architecture of the palace, the Aureate Reach, they called it, named for the golden mineral that ran through the stone of the central spire. I read about the diplomatic protocols, the forms of address, the complex system of precedents that governed everything from where you stood in a room to which direction you faced when the emperor entered. I read about the two princesses. Princess Seraphine was 38 years old, trained from childhood for succession. Every account described her the same way: controlled, brilliant, occasionally terrifying in her precision. She had managed 3 major trade disputes in the outer territories in the last decade, and settled all 3 in Meridian's favor without anyone involved realizing they'd been outmaneuvered until it was too late. She was respected by her father's council with the specific kind of respect that has a slight undercurrent of fear. Princess Liane was 30 years old. Her accounts were more complicated. Brilliant in different ways, she'd published original research in theoretical xenobiology while simultaneously managing a cultural exchange program that had quietly diffused 3 brewing territorial conflicts. But she was also the one who had once walked out of an Imperial Council meeting and not come back for 4 days, during which she was apparently found by security personnel in a remote region of Meridian Prime's second moon, studying some kind of bioluminescent moss, entirely unbothered by the political crisis she had left behind. I read all of this and understood with increasing clarity that I was walking into something I was entirely unprepared for. I made myself a final cup of very good coffee. Then I got on the shuttle. Part 2: The Aureate Reach. Meridian Prime from orbit looks like someone took all the colors of a sunset and rolled them into a sphere. The atmosphere does something to light that I don't have the physics vocabulary to fully describe, something about particulate composition and refraction angles. But the effect, from the shuttle window, was that the planet appeared to glow from within. Amber and rose and gold, with thin bands of deep violet at the poles. It looked like a place where important things happened, like it had been designed to look that way. The city of Orion, the imperial capital, spread across a continental plateau in the northern hemisphere, visible even from orbit as a geometric pattern of light. The meridian built in deliberate shapes. Their city planning was almost algorithmic, streets and structures arranged in nested spirals that had, supposedly, mathematical significance rooted in their ancient philosophical traditions. From above, Orion looked like a vast equation written across the landscape. We landed at the Imperial Approach Dock, which was specifically for diplomatic arrivals and accordingly much more beautiful than the average space dock. Pale stone, the real stuff, not composites, actual quarried stone from the planet's surface, formed archways and columns along the landing bay. There were actual living plants, which in a space dock was almost aggressively extravagant. The lighting was warm and directional, designed to make whoever arrived feel like they were walking into something significant. I stepped off the shuttle in my best dress uniform. I'd had exactly enough time to press it, carrying my data pad and my diplomatic credentials, and about 40 pounds of anxiety I was working very hard not to show. There were two figures waiting. Court advisors I identified quickly from the insignia. Senior ones, given the weight of the medals on their shoulders. They were Meridian-born, which meant bipedal and roughly humanoid. Meridian Prime's indigenous species was one of the closer physical analogs to humanity in the known galaxy, a fact that had always struck me as statistically improbable, and which various species had various theories about, with slightly elongated features, skin that held a faint iridescent quality in certain lights, and eyes that tended toward vivid coloration. These two had gold eyes and dark hair, and the kind of practiced stillness that comes from decades of court life. They introduced themselves, Advisor Thelios and Advisor Marcen. "We are honored by your arrival, Liaison Dreschner," said Thelios, performing a bow of exactly the angle that the etiquette guides had specified for greeting a foreign dignitary of my approximate rank. I was absurdly relieved that I'd read those guides. I returned the bow. "The honor is mine," I said, and meant it, because I was standing on a planet that had been civilized since before my ancestors figured out iron, so it was hard to feel anything but small. "I am grateful for the Emperor's invitation." We moved through the dock. Thelios and Marcen flanked me with the efficient grace of people who had escorted many dignitaries through many places and knew how to make it feel comfortable without being performative about it. They told me as we walked things I already knew, basic orientation information, the schedule for the first day, the location of the quarters they'd prepared for me. And then at the edge of the dock, where it opened into the first of the great corridors of the Orient Reach, they paused. "Liaison Dreschner," Marcen said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, something carefully neutral in the way of a person choosing neutrality deliberately. "Before you meet with the Emperor, there is someone who wishes to speak with you." "Who?" A pause, not long, just enough. "Princess Liane," she said. I kept my face neutral. I was a professional and I was practicing. "Of course," I said. She was in a garden. Inside the palace, actually inside, behind corridors of pale stone and light wells that sent sunlight cascading down from the surface, there was a garden. I hadn't known to expect it, and it stopped me when I came through the archway. My escort fell back without explanation, and I stood at the entrance to something that should not have fit in a building. It was enormous. The ceiling was high enough that it had its own weather. I could see faint wisps of cloud near the top, or what appeared to be cloud. The floor was layered, stone paths, then earth, then what appeared to be a small stream running through the center, lined with plants whose colors existed in spectrums I didn't have names for, blues that were almost ultraviolet, greens that shaded toward a metallic sheen. Flowers that I was fairly certain were doing something with light, not just reflecting it. And in the middle of all of it, sitting cross-legged on a flat stone next to the stream, looking at something in the water, was a woman in plain dark clothing. She didn't look like I'd expected a princess to look. She looked like a person who had found a quiet moment and intended to use it. I walked toward her. My footsteps on the stone path were unavoidably audible, and she looked up before I'd gotten close. "Callum Dreschner," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected. There was something in it, not an accent exactly, but a cadence, a way of placing emphasis that wasn't human but wasn't entirely foreign either. "I wanted to meet you before everything started." "Everything," I repeated. "The ceremony, the presentation, the formal context in which you'll be expected to be a diplomat and I'll be expected to be a princess, and neither of us will be able to just talk." She gestured at the stone beside her. "Sit down if you want." I sat down. For a moment neither of us spoke. The stream made a sound I found unexpectedly calming. Water moved the same way everywhere, apparently. "Can I ask you something directly?" she said. "You can try." She smiled at that, small, real. "Do you know what my father is asking you to do?" "I know what the document said." "What did the document say?" I looked at her. This felt like a test, but it didn't feel like a hostile one. "That there's a dispute, that both you and your sister want something that can't both be given. That your father needs an outside party to arbitrate, because he can't make the decision himself without political consequences." "That's the clean version," she said. "Do you want the real one?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the water. The bioluminescent quality of the plants nearby made the light in the garden shift slightly, slow, like breathing. "My sister and I don't hate each other," she said. "I want you to know that first. Whatever you hear, whatever framing gets applied to this situation, we don't hate each other. It's more complicated and smaller than that." "Okay." "Seraphine has been heir for 38 years. She's good at it. She'd be a good emperor. She has the discipline, the strategy, the patience." A pause. "She also has an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "A diplomatic one, arranged when she was 22, with the Dorathi Federation. You know who they are. 12 Systems, Eastern Cluster, one of the older spacefaring civilizations." "Correct. The agreement was essentially a dynastic alliance framework, Meridian and Dorathi bound together through certain shared governance commitments. It's been in place for 16 years. She paused again. "It also, as a condition of the framework, requires that the heir of Meridian be bonded to a partner from within a specific list of approved bloodlines. A list that was drawn up by the Dorathi Federation, and that excludes," she stopped. "Excludes who?" "Humans," she said simply, "among others. But humans specifically, because 60 years ago when the list was drawn up, humans were not yet spacefaring." I sat with that. "And that matters now because," I said slowly, "there's a human involved somewhere in this." She looked at me. "There's a human involved," she confirmed. "Not you, don't panic," the small smile again. "There's a human, a diplomat's son born on Meridian Prime, grew up here. He's been part of the court for 15 years. He and I," she stopped, chose her words. "It's significant. He's the someone you want." "He's the someone I want." I exhaled slowly. "And if you're named heir instead of your sister?" "The Dorathi agreement doesn't apply to me. I'm not bound by its conditions." She looked back at the water. "So my father has 2 daughters. One bound to an agreement that requires a certain kind of partner. One who wants a partner the agreement prohibits. And he can only name one of us as heir. And whichever one he names has enormous political consequences, either the Dorathi alliance or the future I want. He can't name himself neutral on this." He tried. For 11 years he tried. Something in her voice that wasn't quite sadness, more like exhaustion. The political coalitions on both sides have hardened. If he supports Seraphim and the Dorathi Agreement, the Domestic Reformist Council breaks from the empire. If he supports me and my life, the Dorathi Federation begins to withdraw trade relationships, and we lose access to 6 shipping lanes in the eastern cluster. Either way, someone loses something significant. Either way, he's the one who made that happen to someone he loves. She finally looked at me again, and I saw it then, not the composure, not the careful words, just a person who was very, very tired of a situation she didn't create. So he found you, an outside party, someone who can make the decision so that he doesn't have to be the one who did it. I looked at her for a long moment. "You're telling me all of this," I said, "before I've even met your father, before I've heard the official version of events." "Yes." "Why?" She was quiet for what felt like a long time. The garden breathed its slow, bioluminescent breath around us. "Because I wanted you to hear the human in this story," she said. "Not the politics, not the alliance frameworks, the person." She stood, smoothing the dark fabric of her clothing. "Seraphim will make her case with data and precedent. She's very good at that. I wanted you to have something that isn't data first." She looked down at me. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide for me. I'm asking you to actually see the situation." She turned to go. "The ceremony is at 3rd hour. I'll see you there." She walked back through the garden, past the impossible flowers and the breathing light, and disappeared through an archway on the far side. I sat next to the stream for another few minutes. The water sounded exactly like water sounds on Earth. I found that, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain, enormously steadying. Part 3, 3rd hour. The throne room of the Orient Reach is the largest interior space I have ever stood in. I've been in shuttle bays that could hold a frigate. I've been in the Great Assembly Chamber on Velos, which holds 4,000 delegates and smells aggressively of 3 species idea of air freshener. I've been in the receiving hall of the Tharkin High Council, which is carved from a single continuous piece of asteroid iron, and is so dark inside that they provide guests with light emitters on entry. Nothing I have ever stood inside was as large as the throne room of the Orient Reach. The floor was pale stone that had been polished to a quality that made it mirror-like in places. You walked on your own reflection. The walls rose in curved arcs, meeting overhead at a height I could not accurately estimate, and the entire upper section was transparent, which meant that the Amberandrose sky of Meridian Prime was the ceiling. Light came down through it in long, angled shafts that shifted as the planet rotated, so the whole room was in slow, constant, beautiful motion. The court was assembled. I don't have numbers that would be meaningful. It was a great many beings from a great many species. Meridian Prime's court drew representatives and attendants from across its 63 systems, which meant the assembled crowd was a catalog of sentient life. Species I recognized, species I didn't, species I would have trouble describing to someone who hadn't seen them. The collective sound of that many beings in one room was something below noise and above silence, a hum, almost, a living hum. I walked in under my own power and kept my spine straight and my face composed, and I was grateful for every hour I had spent on breathing exercises in the shuttle, because every instinct in my body wanted to stop and stare at the ceiling. The delegation pathway, the specific route that protocol required me to walk, took me through the center of the assembled court, toward the dais at the far end of the room where the imperial throne sat. I had read about the throne. I had seen images of it. Neither the reading nor the images had prepared me for the physical reality of it, which was less a piece of furniture and more an architectural statement. It rose from the dais like a geological formation, pale stone layered with inlaid metal, and something that glowed with a steady internal light. Not decorated so much as grown, It had the quality of something ancient that had accrued significance over millennia rather than something designed to look significant from the start. Emperor Kalian Vralos sat in it, as though it was entirely ordinary. He was, by Meridian standards, a tall man, white-haired, which in Meridian indicated age rather than youth. Long-featured with those vivid eyes, his were a deep, unusual amber, almost the exact shade of the planet seen from orbit. He was wearing court dress that was elaborate in ways I didn't have enough cultural context to fully decode, but the effect was of someone who had stopped trying to signal power because they didn't need to signal it anymore. It was simply present. On his left sat Princess Seraphine. She was exactly what I'd expected. Upright, precise, with the composed expression of someone who had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. She was in formal court dress of deep blue, and she wore it like she'd been born in it. Her eyes, dark green, vivid, found me across the room before I was halfway to the dais, and I had the sudden, clear sensation of being assessed by a very serious intelligence. On his right sat Princess Layan. She was still in the dark clothing from the garden. She had not changed. Whether this was deliberate or whether she simply hadn't had time or whether it was a statement of some kind, I couldn't tell. She was looking at me with the same careful attention as her sister, but there was something different in it, not assessment exactly. Something more like recognition. We had already had a conversation. I was not a stranger. I reached the base of the dais. I performed the bow correctly. I had practiced it approximately 40 times on the shuttle, and straightened to find the Emperor watching me with an expression that was entirely illegible. "Callum Dreschner," he said. His voice was deep and carried without any visible effort, filling the room in the way that rooms like this are designed to carry voices. "You are welcome in the Orient Reach." "Your Majesty," I said, "the honor is profound." A brief silence, not uncomfortable, deliberate, like he was letting the formality settle before setting it aside. "You know why you are here," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I have been informed of the situation, Your Majesty." "Then we will be direct." He shifted slightly, a small movement, but noticeable, like a mountain adjusting its weight. "You have been asked to serve as the witnessed arbiter. This is an ancient role in Meridian law. Its last invocation was 2,300 years ago, in the reign of Emperor Marcellian Vralos. The arbiter is called when a decision must be made that an emperor cannot make without destroying something he must not destroy. "I understand," I said. "The role carries weight. What you decide today will be entered into the permanent record of this empire. It will shape succession, alliance, and the architecture of this court for a generation." He paused. "Do you accept this role, understanding its gravity?" The room was entirely still. I was aware, with every nerve I had, of the assembled court behind me. Hundreds of beings, maybe thousands, all of them watching a human stand at the foot of the Meridian throne and answer an emperor's question. I thought about what Layan had said in the garden, the human in the story. I thought about what I'd read about Seraphine, the discipline, the precision. I thought about Vornis's face when he'd put the data pad on my desk. "I accept," I said. Part 4, the presentations. What followed was formal, structured, and because this was 11,000 years of civilization doing what it does, conducted with a kind of elaborate procedural grace that made everything feel simultaneously very serious and very performative. Princess Seraphine went first. This, I learned later, was by her choice. She had argued that as the elder and the current heir, precedence gave her the right of first presentation, and she had been correct, and she had exercised it with characteristic decisiveness. She stood from her place on the dais and descended to the floor level, which I realized was a deliberate choice. She was meeting me where I stood rather than speaking down from a position of height. A small gesture, but not a meaningless one. Close up, she was more striking than the distance had suggested. Not beautiful in the way that word usually gets deployed, something sharper than that, like the edge of something well made. She spoke for a long time. I'm going to give you the summary rather than the full text, because the full text ran to approximately 40 minutes, and much of it was embedded in Meridian legal and political tradition that requires a degree of specialized knowledge I don't have. The core argument. The Dorathi Alliance was the structural cornerstone of Meridian's Eastern diplomatic position. 16 years of integrated governance frameworks, 6 shipping lanes, 17 joint defense agreements. Removing the foundations of that alliance, which was what happened the moment Meridian violated the bonding conditions by naming an heir not in compliance with the agreement's terms, would create cascading effects across the Eastern cluster. Not just for Meridian, for every species and civilization that moved goods and people through those shipping lanes, for the defense frameworks that protected 17 inhabited worlds in the border territories. She was not arguing for herself. She was at pains to emphasize. She was arguing for the 63 systems and 412 worlds of the Meridian Empire, all of which functioned inside a diplomatic architecture that she had spent her life maintaining and was asking me to recognize the importance of preserving. She was good. She was very, very good. When she finished, she held eye contact with me for exactly a moment, not intimidating, not pleading, just present, as if she was making absolutely certain I saw her. Then she returned to her place. Silence. Then Lian stood. She didn't come down from the dais. She stayed where she was at the Emperor's right, and when she spoke it was quieter than her sister, not softer, exactly. Just not pitched to fill the room, as if she was speaking to me specifically rather than to everyone. I'm not going to argue precedent, she said. My sister did that better than I could. A ripple through the assembled court. This was not expected, I gathered. I want to tell you something true instead. She looked at me steadily. The Meridian Empire is 11,000 years old. In that time, we have arranged 62 dynastic successions. We have negotiated and renegotiated our diplomatic architecture through 9 major interstellar conflicts, 3 near collapses, and countless smaller fractures. She paused. We are still here. Not because we never made difficult choices, because we made them and survived them and rebuilt where we had to. She let that sit for a moment. Agreements have been renegotiated before. Alliances have shifted. The Dorathi framework is not older than this empire. It is not more permanent than the civilizations it binds. Another pause. What is permanent is precedent. And what you set today, what this empire chooses to stand for today, will be precedent for whoever comes after me, whoever comes after my sister. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment I had the very clear sense that she was choosing carefully. I am asking you, she said, to consider what kind of empire you want to preserve, one that honors its existing commitments at all costs, including the cost of who its people are allowed to love, or one that is strong enough to do the harder thing. She sat down. The room was absolutely silent. Not the courteous silence of an assembled audience being politely attentive, something denser. The silence of a great many beings who had just heard something they hadn't expected and weren't sure what to do with it. I was standing at the base of the dais, and I was very aware that I was the thing between the silence and what came next. The Emperor looked at me. Liaison Dreschner, he said, the floor is yours. Part 5, what I did instead. Here is the thing about being in a room with thousands of beings, all of whom are waiting for you to make a decision that will affect the course of their civilization. The instinct, the human instinct, which I suspect is also most other species' instinct, is to perform certainty, to look like you know what you're doing, to project confidence with the energy of someone who has this completely under control. I'm not going to tell you, I completely resisted that instinct. But I had learned something, in 10 years of diplomatic work, that I kept coming back to in the 12 seconds of silence that followed the Emperor's words. The presenting of a decision as though it's already made doesn't make the decision. It just makes you look better while you're still figuring it out. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let the not knowing be visible, because the alternative, false certainty, tends to produce worse outcomes and more people end up hurt. I looked at the Emperor. "Your Majesty," I said, "may I ask a question before I respond?" A pause, brief but there. "You may." "Who negotiated the Dorathi framework 16 years ago?" Quiet surprise filtered through the room. I felt it more than heard it. Seraphine answered from her place on the dais, precise and immediate. "The initial framework was negotiated by advisor Crescent Malin with my father's authorization. I was involved in the final ratification stages. And the bonding conditions, the list of approved bloodlines, were those proposed by Meridian or by the Dorathi Federation?" "By the Dorathi Federation." "Were they contested at the time?" A slightly longer pause from Seraphine. "There was discussion." "What form did the discussion take?" Meridian's position was that the list was overly restrictive. The Dorathi position was that it was necessary for internal political reasons relating to. And Meridian ultimately accepted the conditions. "Yes." "Because the other components of the framework were valuable enough." "Correct." I nodded slowly, turned slightly. "Advisor Marcin," I said, and she stepped forward from where she'd been standing. "When was the last time Meridian requested an amendment to the Dorathi framework?" She blinked slightly, barely perceptibly. "I would have to check the records." "Could you?" A pause. She touched a small device at her wrist. The record search took about 20 seconds. 7 years ago, she said, there was a request to amend the trade route language in Section 4. Was it approved? Yes. After 3 months of negotiation. So the framework has been amended before. Once for trade language. I understand it was for trade language. I'm asking whether the framework by its own terms is amendable. She looked at me, at the Emperor. Yes, she said. By the framework's own terms, amendments can be proposed by either party. I looked back at the Emperor. Your Majesty, I said, forgive me, but I need to say something before I can say anything else. He waited. The room waited. I had the peculiar sensation of a held breath that belonged to everyone present simultaneously. I was brought here as an arbiter, I said, and I take that role seriously, but I want to name something that I think has been obscured by the structure of this proceeding. I paused, chose words. You are asking me to decide between 2 outcomes, to support the current succession and the Dorathi agreement, or to support a change in succession and a departure from the agreement's bonding conditions. That framing assumes those are the only 2 options. Silence. I don't believe they are. The silence changed quality. What are you suggesting? Seraphine said. Her voice was precise, but there was something underneath it, not alarm, interest held carefully. I'm suggesting that a 3rd option exists, and that it has not been formally proposed because it requires something harder than choosing one of 2 presented alternatives. I kept my voice level. The Dorathi framework is amendable. An amendment to the bonding conditions, removing the exclusion of humans and the other excluded groups, would allow Princess Seraphine to remain heir while also removing the constraint that affects Princess Lien's personal choice. I paused. This is not a simple amendment. It would require significant negotiation with the Dorathi Federation, concessions, time, and political capital. It would be difficult. I looked directly at the Emperor. But Your Majesty, with respect, difficult is not impossible. And impossible is what I was led to believe I was being asked to arbitrate between. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Emperor Kalian Vralos was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then slowly, very slowly, he said, "You were not briefed on prior attempts to pursue this avenue." No, I said, I was not. There were prior attempts. I believe you. I would ask what blocked them. Another pause, longer. The Dorathi Federation's position was that any amendment to the bonding conditions would require Meridian to give significant concessions in the eastern shipping lanes. Concessions that our trade analysts calculated would cost the empire more than the diplomatic benefit of the change was worth. Who performed that analysis? Our own diplomatic corps. May I ask, at what point in the analysis was the human factor introduced? As in, when was the question of the bonding conditions relevant enough to the human diplomatic community to factor into cost-benefit modeling? Marcenne was very still. The analysis was conducted 8 years ago, she said, before the current human diplomatic presence in this region. I let that sit. Your Majesty, I said, I'm a grade 4 human diplomatic liaison. I am not in a position to renegotiate the Dorathi framework. That's beyond my authority and would require formal backing from human diplomatic leadership, which I don't have here. I paused. What I am in a position to say, as the witnessed arbiter you asked me to be, is that the choice presented to this court is not the full set of choices available to it. I looked at both princesses in turn. Seraphine was watching me with an expression I was beginning to recognize. It was the expression of someone recalibrating a situation. Liane had gone very still in the way of someone controlling a strong reaction. My decision as arbiter, I said, is not to choose between Princess Seraphine and Princess Liane. My decision is to formally name for the record of this empire that the current choice is a false dilemma. I held the Emperor's gaze, and to recommend formally for the record that before this court proceeds, it exhausts the third option. And if the third option fails, the Emperor said, if the Dorathi Federation refuses amendment, then you bring me back, I said, and I'll make the hard call, but let me make the easy one first.